I was hoping to be in the centre tonight, but obviously that's not possible. So I did make an effort, and I got my colourful Indian Buddha out as well. The Indians like their colour, I was saying before, so I thought I'd share that with you as well. Just going to try and go back onto gallery, so I'm not just talking to myself. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit this evening about three particular things, three particular recollections I have from my time in India. So back in January 2018, there were 8 of us from Nottingham Buddhist Centre and 1 order member, a guy called Dayabhadra from London. And we went on pilgrimage for a couple of weeks, and we travelled across India, starting off in Mumbai, finishing off in Bodhgaya. I'll be honest, I went along looking forward to getting to know some of the people that I'd be traveling with a bit better. At the time, I'd been a mitra for around, well, I'd become a mitra at the Buddha Day just before that. So, you know, I've not even been a mitra for a year. But in particular, I wanted to go just with an open mind, because I'd never traveled quite a bit, but never been to anywhere like India. So just go with an open mind, see what happens. And so we arrived in Mumbai, and on the first full day there, we went over to a Triratna retreat center in a place, well, it's known as Chunabati. And Mumbai has the second largest slum in the world. It's second only to, I think, Lima in Peru. So this huge slum, and Chunabati is kind of on the edge of, as I recall, of this huge slum in Mumbai. And we turned up, and not really knowing quite what to expect. It wasn't a building as such. It was a kind of tin roof and open on 3 sides. And at one end was a wall with a shrine, a very bright Indian style shrine. And I thought we were just there to have a look around, perhaps meet 1 or 2 people. But what happened is they had all these red plastic chairs, the sort that you'd get outside of a cafe, perhaps. And all of a sudden, these red chairs started to be put out, and then a few people arrived, and then a few more, and then before we knew it, I think I'm not good with them, but I was probably at least 100, probably more people. But quickly, this centre filled up of all of these Indian Sangha members who'd come to see us. It was really quite overwhelming, and I've been told that Indians, they like speeches, they like people to talk to them. So as part of the evening, the order members were invited up and said a few words, and then they wanted to hear for some mitras. So me and Vanessa, who was there, who you'll perhaps know from the Sangha, we went up and said a few words and thanked them for their hospitality. I actually invited them back to Nottingham as well, which they found very funny. I don't think any of them have been back yet though. But it was, and the warmth of that Sangha was just really overwhelming, really overwhelming, to the extent that I feel it even now. And I can be quite sentimental, so I'm going to try and keep it together. But one thing that moved me more than anything was there was afterwards a group of guys came up to me, and they were Indian mitras, and they said to me, "Thank you for coming. We're so inspired in having you coming to see us." And I've never felt more humble in my life. I just wanted to express how inspired I was by these people, who many have very little, and I will never forget that moment. It was really such a powerful moment for me. And as I mentioned, I'd not been a mitra very long, but one of the modules that I had studied with Arivachin was what is the Sangha? And I remember one of the questions, I don't know if it was Arivachin asking the question or if it was in the study, was which of the 3 jewels kind of is most relevant to you? Which one stands out the most for you? And I remember at the time putting the Sangha at the bottom. And it wasn't until I had that direct experience with those guys, with that broader Sangha, the warmth of that Sangha, how how we were welcomed, had a really profound effect on me. And it was that deep experience of Sangha that really, really, yeah, I found really quite transformative. And as I say, I can still connect to that today in my metta bhavana. I I I only have to bring those guys to mind, and that is such a powerful um, source of inspiration for me, to think about these people who many had traveled a long distance as well. I didn't mention that 20, 30, 40 kilometers. I think I'm right in saying, just to come and see us. And yeah, I was so humbled. It was just incredible. So I've only got a few pictures this evening, but I'm going to share with you my screen and show you these guys. So there we go. You'll see a bit of the bright shrine at the back there as well. I remember as well the little boy, he was called Samba, and his mum took great delight in telling me that that was short for Sambuddha. So when you say Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa, that's where his name came from. So there we go. There's one of my first and probably most profound experiences very early on in our pilgrimage to India. I'm going to move on to the second image that I've got now. It's not a great image, but it shows a place called Mahavihar in Pune. So it's a Triratna center in Pune, in India, which has been there for quite some time. And as you see, quite a simple shrine, but colourful as well in its own way. You'll also perhaps hopefully be able to pick out the two pictures there of Sangha and also Dr. Ambedkar. And you'll often commonly see this in India. You'll see, they obviously revere Dr. Ambedkar very strongly, but you will often see the two images side by side as well. So I'll stop sharing at that stage because it's not actually about the shrine that I want to talk about. So I've recently given up my job. I'm having a break, which is something I, back in 2018, I couldn't have ever imagined doing. But I used to work as a trainer of trainee pharmacists, so 20-somethings. And I enjoyed my job, but it did have its frustrations, not least because some trainees, I'm trying to say this with as much kindness as I can, but have a sense of entitlement, that they expect everything to be given to them and not necessarily needing to put a great deal of effort in themselves. Why I'm telling you this is because at Mahavihar, they had classrooms. And as we were having a look around this centre, there were children, teenagers studying, and I remember inquiring about this and asking a little bit about it. And it turns out that the classrooms were largely there for people who didn't have the resources to study at home. Now, anyone who knows anything about the Buddhists in India will be aware that a lot of them come from the former untouchables, what are known as the Dalits nowadays, but people who have been at the absolute bottom of the social heap, if that's the right way to express it. And I just found this so inspiring that these people who, if it wasn't for the Dharma, if it wasn't for Buddhism, if it wasn't for Triratna, actually, that these people would not possibly have the opportunity to educate themselves. And I reflected on my experience and how difficult sometimes I found it working with people studying back home, and what a precious opportunity this was for them, that was provided through through the centre there. And it made me realize just how powerful the Dharma can be, not only to transform our lives and create opportunities like that, but also to transform minds. Because with the background, with the heritage that a lot of these people have, my experience is that it can be hard to overcome that conditioning that actually they don't deserve any better than what they were born with, and that they shouldn't be better, that they can't be better. And this was kind of living proof that actually the Dharma can transform lives. The Dharma is transforming lives, even as as we sit here this evening. And I just found that incredibly inspiring, and the amount of hope as well that the Dharma can give to people's lives in India is so powerful. It's just it's almost impossible not to respond to that emotionally yourself. So that was number two. Number three was my experience of going to Bodhgaya, so the place where the Buddha had his enlightenment. And there's a temple there called the Mahabodhi temple, where there is a tree which isn't meant to be the original Bodhi tree, but meant to be a descendant of the Bodhi tree under which the Buddha gained enlightenment. And when we finished our pilgrimage in Bodhgaya, and the night that we arrived, it was quite a magical night actually. We turned up and it was a full moon, and the significance of doing a puja on a full moon, is quite well known. It's but it wasn't just a full moon; it was an eclipse and a blood moon. It's very auspicious. It was quite a magical evening. But I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on the fact that I realized how many different traditions were there practicing together in their own way. So we went into the Mahabodhi temple, 9 of us, to do our puja. I think our guide was there as well. And we did our puja, and it's all really lovely. But then actually realizing that different cultures, people from different countries, different traditions of Buddhism were practicing in their own way, but we were all there together, and all there because we had been touched by the Buddha's experience in our own way. And it reminds me of what a remarkable thing Sangha actually did to develop the Dharma to us here in the West initially. And how the Dharma changes and has to change and respond to different cultures to be meaningful to different cultures. And again, this was all there to see and experience. So we did our puja, and then there was a Triratna order convention on at the time in Bodhgaya as well. And I hadn't kind of clocked it really, but there was about 100 Triratna order members just behind us, and they started their puja about half an hour afterwards. And the experience of having our small sangha, they're doing a puja, but then the larger Triratna puja going on as well, and then all of these other Buddhists practicing in their own way, I just found so inspiring. And not surprisingly, perhaps, the experience of being in India, the things I'd seen, the things I'd felt, had got me thinking about, well, is this something I want for myself, to ask for ordination, to take this as far as I possibly can? And probably not surprisingly, there were a few doubts, a few questions, a few obstacles in my mind. But in that moment, they all went away. And I felt connected to the Buddha in a way that I had not felt before, in a way that I can't really explain, but I just had this sense that everything was going to be all right. So subsequently, I told Aryavachan about my experience that night, and that was kind of my first path, my first step on the path to ordination. And soon after coming back from India, indeed, I did, just a few weeks later, ask for ordination. So India had, hopefully I've been able to express, a really, really profound effect on me. It made me realize more deeply the preciousness of the three jewels, the three things that we go to refuge for. Being in those places where the Buddha walked and talked and was enlightened, and also seeing the transformative effect of the Dharma and the joy that it brought to people's lives, in India, in the Sangha in India. But also the third jewel, of course, the Sangha itself, not only the warmth of the India Sangha, but many of you will be aware of the term Bodhichitta. Bodhicitta means the will to enlightenment, the urge, the desire, the drive in your heart and mind to become enlightened. And it's said that that happens most strongly, that arising of that sense, when people practice together. And that for me has never been more strong than being in Bodhgaya, practicing in my own Sangha with Triratna and the part of Triratna there as well, and but you know, the global Buddhist community there really. So I went with an open mind, and I got a lot more probably than I ever thought was possible. Sangha actually talks about how important it is to protect our sources of inspiration. So I'm really grateful to be able to share that with you tonight, because my experience of India has provided me with some of my strongest sources of inspiration that I'm glad to say still haven't lost their power in all this time. I am a bit sentimental, and I sometimes wonder when I think about that connection that I have, particularly with the guys in Chunabati, the first picture that I showed you. Am I just being sentimental? But it's more than that. It is so much more than that. It has, it's changed my life. And I'm nearly done. But I would say that we did have the opportunity to raise a bit of money for the Sangha in Chunabati, and we sent some money and some presents over there as well. And I sent a copy of that picture and a little thank you card to each of those guys. So I don't know if it got there, but I hope it did. But I still feel a very strong connection with them today. So just before I finish, I'll just show you my last two pictures. I almost forgot I had them there. So so when I was saying about how different people practice, this was I don't know who these where these people are from, but this was well before COVID, but they were some people were practicing in their own little pods. And this isn't my photo, I'm not sure whose it was, but I just found that quite amusing. And then this one, I think Kashantika took this one. This was the following evening. And I don't know if you can pick out there that while we were doing our puja and our meditation, there's several dogs in the complex, and one of them came and just sort of snuggled itself in to the side of me and fell asleep as I was there meditating. So that's another lovely, lovely memory that I take away from India. So, and I will leave it there. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, that love of India, the place and the people, really came across there. So thank you for sharing all of that. Really beautiful. Yeah, lovely. Good. So we're going to move on to Connor now, who's going to share here from the shrine room.
Thank you. This is the point in the night where I start worrying, is my talk going to land and am I about to talk a load of nonsense? And it happens every time and it's never true. Paul, in many ways, my story and your story overlap quite a lot for reasons I'll get onto, which I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, I went to India quite early last year. It was mid to late February into early March. And I was very lucky to be able to go actually because of the pandemic. Because by this point, we'd started to get more of the sense that it was a little bit more kind of serious than what we initially thought, maybe before Christmas. And there was a little bit of consternation. Would I be able to go? Would it be okay to go? And thankfully, I managed to make it out there, which I'm very thankful for. And I went, this was as part of a pilgrimage that I went on that had two parts to it. There was the pilgrimage and there was the International Buddhist Youth Convention, which is an event that's held every 4 years I believe always in India, for Buddhist youths from all around the world. In this instance, it was held at Bodhgaya. So the pilgrimage itself primarily consisted of a visit to the 4 main holy sites. So for those of you who don't know where those are, that is Lumbini, which is in Nepal, which is where the Buddha was born, Bodhgaya, where he was enlightened, Sarnath, where the first teaching was given to the 5 ascetics, and then Kushinara, where the Buddha passed away. And there were various other, I don't want to say minor sites because that feels like I'm underselling them, but they weren't sort of part of the main 4. So we went to Nalanda, which is a big Buddhist monastic university that used to exist. Padmasambhava is said to have stayed there before taking Buddhism to Tibet. And we also went to the other one that sticks out in my mind was Vulture's Peak in Rajgir, which is a truly striking sight as well. And it's often said that if you visit these 4 main sites, the birth, the nirvana, the first teaching, and the parinirvana, something will happen. And it's never really specified what, but something will happen. And as I'll get on to, something did. Spoiler alert. So, yeah. Sorry, to find my place in my notes. So at each of these sites, and primarily for me, this affected me the most while at Sarnath and at Bodhgaya, and especially in the Mahabodhi temple, which Paul alluded to, and in the deer park where the first teaching was given. I felt a profound kind of emotional movement. And it was primarily sort of connection and metta. And various other things mixed into that as well. And there was a real weight about the place because fairly obviously something very significant happened at these places. And the sites themselves connected me to that, and it connected all of us that were there to that, both on our pilgrimage and from all the other wonderful traditions that were there practicing. And it connected us to the Buddha and what happened 2,500 years ago, because the place does remember. And the place remembers what happened, and it has a real weight behind it as a result of that. And the journey itself was also quite significant, independent of the individual places that I went. And the reason that was true is because what I was effectively doing, albeit in a different order, was to retrace the footsteps of the Buddha. I was on the same route that he was on. Granted, he did it in a lot longer of a time frame than I did, and in a slightly different order to which I went. I think we finished in Lumbini, but that's kind of beside the point. I was walking in his footsteps, and I reflected at the time, and I still reflect now, and still this is very significant to me. There's a very, very high likelihood, and I can feel myself getting emotional about it now, that I may have stood in the exact spot that the Buddha stood, that I may have sat and meditated in the exact place that the Buddha sat and meditated. And that was really powerful for me. And that was really, really sobering and really connected me to what happened. And that allowed me to connect to the Buddha. But importantly, it allowed me to connect to the Buddha as a person. Because we often think of the Buddha, and I think this is completely fair, and I think this is very true, as this very exalted being, which he is, and as this very spiritually attained being, which he is. But the problem I often find, certainly with myself, is that that can put him a little bit far out of reach. We can kind of lose touch with him in certain ways, and he can become sort of a little bit too kind of high up there that we can never quite get to where he is. Sangha once used the turn of phrase, I don't know if it was in reference to or while speaking to some Christian missionaries, and it was quite a tongue-in-cheek way of referring to the Buddha as the God who didn't create the universe. And I think it's very easy to think of him in those terms. And the problem there is we do cut ourselves off. And we cut ourselves off from our own potential. And if I don't watch what I'm doing, I do start to think in these terms and in these very absolutist terms, in a way that can be very spiritually limiting. So I was on this journey and I was connecting to the Buddha in the land of his birth. And in many ways, this was a physical manifestation of what it was I'm trying to do, what it is perhaps I'm trying to do as a Buddhist. Because, yeah, and I think in many ways what we're all trying to do as Buddhists, because we've all been born, that we can't really deny, and one day we're all going to die, and we can't really disagree with that either, I don't think. But at the same time, we are all quite capable of professing the Dharma, and I'm sitting here doing that right now, and we don't have to be enlightened to do that. Granted, I'm doing it in the form of a personal talk. It comes in many other forms as well. And many of you listening to me have also given talks on the Dharma in one form or another, or have had the opportunity to do so, or will have the opportunity to do so. And simultaneously, we are all also capable of becoming enlightened. And this is what I really connected to. We all have the ability to, in whatever form the Bodhi tree takes for us, in whatever form Bodhgaya takes for us, we all have the potential to become enlightened. And to accomplish precisely what the Buddha accomplished 2.5 years ago. Because, and this is often emphasized, but very easily forgotten, he showed us the way. The Buddha is a teacher. He isn't a god. He isn't to be put on such high of a pedestal that we can't get there ourselves. The reason we venerate him, the reason we worship him, is because he showed us what's possible. He showed us what we are all capable of. And that's what we're trying to do as Buddhists. We're trying to become enlightened. And depending on what tradition we belong to, that the goal may be to become enlightened, or, and this is true for Triratna as it is for many other schools, we're trying to become enlightened for the benefit of all beings. It's not enough for just us to get enlightened. We're trying for everybody to get enlightened. Every man, every woman, every child, every animal, everybody in the hell realms, all of the hungry ghosts, everybody, all living beings. And that's the Bodhisattva ideal. And this is what the Buddha espoused. And this is what the Buddha tried to strive towards himself at the time the doctrine wasn't developed in this way. But this is what he was trying to do by professing the Dharma in the way that he did. And this is what we're still trying to do now by professing the Dharma in the way that we do 2,500 years later. So in many ways, my journey was a manifestation of that, because we're all trying to follow in the spiritual footsteps of the Buddha. And we're all trying to do what he did all that time ago. And indeed, at the time, one of the first images of the Buddha wasn't the rupas that we see behind us here, and the many weird and wonderful rupas that we can get of all the various figures representing various parts of enlightenment. It wasn't even a painting. One of the first images of the Buddha from the very, very early traditions was a footstep. Was a footstep in the ground, inviting us to follow, inviting us to come with him as he was showing us the way. So I was able to reconnect to this through India, through my time there, and through following the Buddha's footsteps, both physically and spiritually. And this allowed me to reconnect with what it was that I was trying to do. It allowed me to reconnect to quote from the Threefold Puja, that the Buddha was born as I was born, and what the Buddha attained, I too can attain. And I was able to reconnect with why I was doing this on a much deeper level than what I was able to before I went. And it allowed me to clarify why I was here, why I was practicing in the way that I am. And the fact that this journey isn't just about me, and it isn't just about my own happiness. Yes, it's very good for those things, but it doesn't stop there. In a way, that isn't enough. That it extends outwards, and it affects all of those I come into contact with, all of the people they come into contact with, and it ripples out. And even those I don't come into direct contact with, there are people out there that have been affected by my practice that I've never met, that I never will meet. I don't know their names, I don't know what they look like, but sure enough, it has an effect. And it will continue to do that. Yes. So, similar to Paul, while I was over there, I was kind of mulling over the question of what it means to go for refuge, and what it means to be a Buddhist, and what it means to take this deeper, and do I want to take this deeper? And exactly the same as you, Paul, when I got back, I wrote off to Padmaloka about 2 or 3 weeks later, and I myself requested ordination off of the back of my pilgrimage to India, having reconnected to what it means not just to be within Triratna, not just to practice in the way that I do, not just to try to be generally a little bit happier, but to truly be a Buddhist and all of the weight that comes behind that. So that was my experiences of India, and that's what it still means to me today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Connor and Paul. Yeah, I don't know, I feel really, really moved. Like there were so many resonances with my own experience of India, and it's just very beautiful to hear how you were touched by those experiences. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Okay, so actually need me to move, or we could, yeah. Great. Okay.
Oh yes, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think some of you probably know that I've got a lot of connections with India myself, but I'm actually not going to share too much about that tonight. And I'm going to share more about sort of where we're going with this month and how we're going to explore those connections with India. But yeah, it just really, it's just so lovely hearing Paul and Connor, because it totally put me back in touch with those experiences myself of being in those places of pilgrimage, of meeting Buddhists whose lives have been transformed and touched by the Dharma there, of seeing the Dharma projects there, and you know the effect that those projects have on people's lives there, the sort of strength of opportunity that it can give people in India. So yeah, it was really beautifully sort of evoked, both of you, and some of those images and the photos and things just really brought that back. So thank you very much. So I kind of want to sort of trace right from India as the land of the Buddha to why we're sort of looking at India month here this month. Yeah, I think Connor sort of touched on this really well, that as the land where we actually can potentially walk on, literally on the same land as the Buddha, there's something really strong about that experience of being in those places where the Buddha practiced, taught, sat, lived, walked, ate. Yeah, and it's just quite, just being there can be very, very strong. And yeah, it can just help you feel closer to the Buddha, as you said, kind of that sort of human, the human being Gautama who walked in India, practiced. Yeah. And then, of course, coming from the Buddha, then we had Ambedkar. So we heard from Kaimasiri a few weeks ago about the anniversary of the conversion. So those people who, were believed to be at the bottom of what is known as the caste system, and for that reason discriminated in all forms of life, in all of society, education, and the freedom that they gained by choosing a religion which didn't discriminate along those terms. So the freedom by the sort of choice that they made, which opened and freed their minds, but also then the opportunities that they then met a bit later through being part of a Buddhist tradition as well, which I'll say a bit more about in terms of Triratna. And of course, Ambedkar, for that reason, is just held up. Actually, he's sort of considered a bodhisattva in India by many of those Indian Buddhists. And at the moment, the Mitra study groups are studying this module on Ambedkar. So Kaimasiri had this idea that all of the study groups would study this module at the same time in sort of connection with one another, and around that, the conversion anniversary. So Ambedkar was a really wonderful, inspiring man. I'm very inspired by Ambedkar in his life. So he helped revive Buddhism in India, and then he did have these connections with Triratna as well. There's a letter, I think you mentioned this letter that he wrote to Bhante, where he said, it's wonderful what you're doing and you need to be doing more. There's something of this sort of Vajra spirit that Ambedkar had. And he himself did so much across India. Yeah. So that brings us then to the connection with Sangha, with Triratna. And as Kaimasiri mentioned, Sangha was in India at the time of Ambedkar's death. So that was about 6 weeks after the conversion, sadly. And Sangha at that time was very prolific in just going around and meeting thousands of Buddhists who had decided and had heard that Buddhism was a religion which didn't discriminate on the basis of caste, and they felt liberated by that choice. But then they were in extremely strong grief through the death of Ambedkar, who they were following as this sort of figure. And Sangha was really able to meet them and just communicate the Dharma to them and sort of show them a bit of a path, a bit of a way. So similarly in India, as well as Ambedkar, Sangha holds a very, very special place in people's hearts in India. So a little bit about then my history. So when I first met the movement, I had studied international development at university, and I heard about the Karuna Trust, who are a charity who support many of the Dalit projects in India, but also gender equality projects, education projects. So particularly with discriminated groups in India. And I heard about the Karuna Trust, and somehow it felt like that really combined international development with the Dharma. And I just felt very moved to kind of move into that and do something. So I did a 6-week fundraising appeal with the Karuna Trust, and that led on my journey and my own connection with India. So I've been to India 3 times, twice on pilgrimage and once to actually just go on a work visit with the Karuna Trust and visit some of the projects that Karuna funded out there. And I'm not going to say too much, but it just, many of those experiences that Connor and Paul have shared, like I just have so many wonderful, beautiful stories of my own meetings with people in India, and just like particularly, I think what stands out for me is how extremely generous people in the Sangha are there, and hospitable and welcoming, and their emotional positivity. So many people that I met in the Sangha in India were just so emotionally positive and sort of bright and beautiful and inspired by the Dharma. And yeah, I just, you know, when I bring them to mind, I just feel very, just very sort of inspired by their practice, the strength of their practice. So I'm also a trustee still for the India Dharma Trust, who have now combined with the Future Dharma Fund, and they raise money also for Triratna India projects. So particularly the India Dharma Trust is about dharmic projects. So whereas Karana is the more social projects in India, the India Dharma Trust is Dharma projects. And I was thinking a bit about women in India. So gender discrimination is extremely strong in India. And many of the people in the Triratna movement are also Dalit. So they're sort of doubly discriminated. So they have that discrimination of being a Dalit, but also then of being a woman. And there's some amazingly strong women in the Triratna community who have and still are working just like tirelessly to help people meet the Dharma and transform their lives in very, very difficult conditions and in very dangerous conditions. And yeah, I just, when I hear what some of them sort of go through, you know, you've got Shradavadri, yeah, who is, I think, a black belt in karate or something, because she knew that what she wanted to do was travel around India and take the Dharma, and the only way that she felt she could protect herself was to literally, you know, learn how to sort of protect herself physically. And yeah, just really courageous women, very beautiful, courageous women. So for all of these reasons, and also because I've also done quite a lot in Triratna supporting the young people's movement, we've decided to link up with a project that Future Dharma and the India Dharma Trust are funding, with an order member, a woman called Vidya Vardhani, who's an Indian order member, and she leads a project called Triratna Youth in India. And it's her we're going to be able to meet online on November the 20th. So I'm going to say a little bit about that, the Sangha Festival that we have on November the 20th. So it's an opportunity for us to also be with Indian Mitras. So Vidya Vardhani at the moment is rounding up hopefully loads of Indian Mitras, and she's going to get them to come along on Zoom and actually be with us. And we're going to practice together. So we'll do the refuges and precepts Indian style. We'll do some puja, some ritual together. I'm going to interview Vidya Vardhani as well. So we're going to hear from her about that project and what it is that she does. And we'll also have a couple of talks, one from a Mitra here and one from a Mitra in India, about friendship. So the theme is friendship through good times and bad. So it's particularly for Sangha Day, we thought we'd love to hear about sort of people in India and their friendships. So I guess I wanted to say a bit about why a young Buddhist project is necessary. So it's sort of similar to here, really. The order and the movement is aging, so we do need younger people involved. But in India particularly, it's very, very difficult there currently, politically, economically, socially. It's a very, very difficult place to be living. And similarly to here, young people are looking for value and looking for meaning in their lives, but also it is just externally a really difficult time to be there. And it's been really isolating as well during the lockdown. I'm sure many of you will know that the lockdown was very extreme and difficult in India, and is still, I'm not sure what the situation is right now, but it's been really dire, you know, people not being able to get food that they needed, people who are on a daily wage, so they don't get paid unless they actually turn up for work. So, you know, being sent home during the lockdown, having to walk miles and miles, days and days to get to their homes, and then not having any income at all. So it's a really extreme sort of time there at the moment. And the Young Buddhist Project responded really swiftly. So they moved their classes onto Zoom really quickly. So a bit like us, they had to adapt, but they do it for like hundreds of people. It's amazing how full their Zoom meetings are. And all they need is a smartphone. And many of the young people in India do have a smartphone. So it's something that it's one of the main ways that they communicate, especially through WhatsApp. But it's meant that the online project has been able to meet much wider scope than they usually would in India, which is great. It's one of the benefits of Zoom. So I'll just say a little bit about Vidya Vardhani. She's a really inspiring woman. She was born in Bihar and then she moved to Maharashtra to meet the Dharma. And she wanted to take the Dharma back to Bihar, which is in the north. And she didn't know how to do this. So she was ordained in 2017 and she didn't know how she'd be able to take the Dharma back there because there was no Triratna communities there. So Zoom has really helped her with this. She's been able to have like a really far and wide reach. India is like a massive country. It's huge. It's not, you know, when we look at a map, it doesn't look that big, but it's not represented proportionately. Like it's such a huge country. And yeah, they're able to reach young people in a way that they never could before. So Vidya Vardhani especially works with young women and girls, and she supports women in their ordination process. So they've been running lots of events, developing spiritual friendships. I think, she just works really, really long hours and she just works really hard. She, as well as running these Zoom groups and sort of actually moving around physically to meet people as well, she has phone calls. She just has contact with a lot of women, a lot of young women. So really, I just want to invite you to come along on the 20th of November and come and meet Vidya Vardhani and the Indian Sangha. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really beautiful, really inspiring day. And it's also an exciting opportunity for us to actually support that project. So we heard the Dharma appeal from Anthony about the fact that we're sort of trying to grow the centre here and this sort of vision that we have of growth and abundance. But actually generosity isn't exclusive to our Sangha. We also want to be generous to other Sanghas and other projects. So we're going to do a one-off fundraiser on that day, on the 20th of November, and try and raise as much as we can, hopefully £3,000, towards funding Vidya Vardhani's role in that project for a year. So yeah, do come along. There's limited places to come in person, but we're going to do it as a hybrid event. So we'd love it to be like really busy online, especially so that when the Indian Mitras come, there's a lot of people for us to put into groups with them. It'd be really lovely for them to meet as many people as possible. Good. So just to end the evening, I'm going to hand back to Kemasiri, and we're going to end with a bit of ritual and maybe a short meditation just to end. Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so we will end the evening with a meditation and chanting of the Dhammapalagata, which is, we've done that before, and it's got a connection with India because it's the verses are put together are chosen from the Dhammapada, by Dr. Ambedkar. So, and that's the first 3 verses. I'll read them in English so you can just hear them. And the last 3 verses are from the Tiratmana Vandana, which is a well-known text. Just rejoicing in the importance of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, really. But thank you very much, Kusala Devi, Connor, and Paul. I really enjoyed listening. I was just transported to India, totally. So and we'll have more. So let's just sit for a short moment, and then I'll read the English version of the Dhammapada, and then I'll chant it in Pali. And after the 3 first verses, anybody here wants to join in, feel free to do so. And then we'll sit a little bit longer. Not to do evil, to cultivate the good, to purify the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. Lead a righteous life, not one that is corrupt. The righteous live happily, both in this world and the next. One is not versed in Dharma who merely speaks much. One who hears but a little of the teaching, but sees the truth and observes it well. Indeed, such a one is truly called one versed in Dharma. No other refuge than the wake. Refuge supreme is there for me. Oh, by the virtue of this truth, may grace abound and victory. No other refuge than the truth. Refuge supreme is there for me. Oh, by the virtue of this truth, may grace abound and victory. No refuge but a fellowship. Refuge supreme is there for me. Oh, by the virtue of this truth, may grace abound and victory. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, homage to the Sangha. Sababapasa akaranang kusalasa upasampada Sachita paryodapanam etang buddhanang sasanang Dhammang chare sucharitam Nanang ducharitang chare Dhammachari sukham sati asmin loke paramicha natavata dhammadaro yavata bahubasati yocha apam pisudvana Dhammang kayena pasati sabe dhammadaro oti yodhamana pamachati nati me saranananyang buddho me saranang varam Etena Sachavachena Hotu me Jaya Mangalam Nati me Saranananyam Damo me Saranam Varam Etena Sachavachena Hotu me Jaya Mangalam Nati me Saranananyam Sangho me Saranam Varam Etena Sachavachena Hotu me Jaya Mangalam Namo Buddhaya Namo Dhammaya Namo Sanghaya Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu